Okay, good morning, everyone. So we're going to kick off now. I wasn't sure if I was waiting for someone to introduce me or I was going to introduce myself, but apparently I'm introducing myself. So first of all, my name is Josef Baines. I'm from London Sport and the Disability Development Officer. But just before we kick off, I'd like to explain how we're going to work with the interpreter. So you can see that I'm signing up here in BSL, and the interpreter is voicing into English. So you may occasionally hear another interpreter's voice if they're supporting him when they're co-working. So I just wanted to add more information to you as the audience this morning, because you've had a very long morning. I'm sure you're overwhelmed with all that you've been told. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit more and finish you off completely. So today, we're going to focus on translating the DCMS, Sports England, and so on policy into practice. And we're going to focus on disabled people. Now, of course, you can apply this to LGBT, gender, and so on. But today, we're just going to focus on disability and how to make our work more inclusive and increase the participation of disabled people. I just want to show you something, first of all, before we get on with the content of the presentation that we're going to cover this morning. As you can see, I'm a stunning artist. That is the best drawing I've done since my A-levels. Anyway, seriously, inclusion and diversity means that we have to be bold and go forward and learn new things, have new ideas, in just the same way that they did with the Star Trek mission. We need to go where no woman has been before. I was trying to make it equal. Okay, so the content of the workshop today, we're going to focus on 5 key areas. First of all, inclusion and diversity. We're going to look at what that is and what it means. Secondly, talent management. Third, strength in numbers. Fourthly, the summary. And then how we can move forward, a call to action. So the aims of the workshop, we've got 4 key aims that we're going to achieve, hopefully. To learn how to discover and polish up the hidden gems regarding disability talent management. To become a force for good through better awareness of working with disabled people. To go on a journey of enlightenment by understanding more about diversity and inclusion. And fourthly, to join our expanding fan base and start the journey of systemic change. Now, by fan base, that's linked to the call for action, so I will explain that at the end. So, diversity is a reality, but inclusion is a choice. So this is Stephen Frost. He's someone I worked with at LOCOG previously. Diversity is everywhere. We can bring as many different people into a room as we want and say, well, we're all diverse, fabulous. But actually, inclusion is the choice. You then have to make if you want to get the talents and skills from that diversity. So I've got a question for you. Put your hand up if you want to respond. What is free, of infinite supply, and within our control?
Enthusiasm.
Any more? Yes, we certainly, it's true, it's free, and there's a plentiful supply, but I'm not so sure it's all within our control.
Choice.
Close.
Inspiration.
Okay, right. Good thinking. And it's a really hard question because it's so broad. But the answer that I want is attitude. Attitude affects everything that we do, from customer service, talking to people face to face, answering the phones. It's thought to action. If we change the attitude of 50, 100, 1,000 people in your organisations to become more inclusive to disabled people, that would be an enormous change and would have a massive impact. However, unconscious bias, which has become rather a hot topic at the moment, it's important because it affects everything that we do, from recruitment through to what we do in our everyday work. Unconscious bias is normal. We all have it. It helps us to make decisions about information in a very information-rich environment. It helps us to cope with processes and systems. It's an internal shortcut, a way to make quick decisions. And the internal controls allows us to cope. However, the processes can be flawed. And through being flawed, they affect our decisions, and then from our decisions, the culture of the organisation. Organisations are created by people, not by nature. And so, we have to make the effort to put aside our unconscious bias, one small implementation of bias might have a small local effect. One person talking to another person, and that's fine. However, if many individuals are doing the same thing, then that will greatly affect the structure of the environment and organisation, and it makes it a universal bias. If you act according to the bias, then essentially you're feeding into a system of prejudging unconsciously. So if you imagine, when you're firing artillery, you need to make sure that the angle of your artillery, the big gun, is appropriate so that you land the ballistic in the right area. Well, it's exactly the same as setting the tone of the culture in your organisation. You need to work with people's attitudes to make sure that they'll be inclusive in the longer term. Now, there's an implicit association test created in America at Harvard University. And there are 3 universities who've worked in partnership to investigate this issue of unconscious bias. And there are a whole range of tests, all of which are free, and there's some which are disability focused, which I did myself. And I was absolutely gobsmacked at the result. Because what they do is they see whether you have an automatic preference for disabled or non-disabled people. Well, I have an automatic preference for non-disabled people. And that affects everything I do, so I have to make conscious efforts to think about disabled people when I'm doing my work. The test is free, as I said. You can just do it, go online if you see the link here, and encourage your colleagues in your organisations to do it as well. It's really quite thought-provoking when you see you can do it for age, gender, race, and so on. It really can be quite astounding. So another question for the audience. Why is real inclusion good? Now let me just clarify first of all. By real inclusion, I mean embracing infinite diversity, as opposed to superficial inclusion, which means tokenistic diversity. So why is real inclusion good? Who's as keen as mustard to kick off?
It's what most people want.
Mm-hmm. But why? Why is it good, though? Why is it a good thing in itself?
It covers a basic need.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's one thing. Any other thoughts?
It's healthy for unity to be together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. Any other thoughts?
It creates a community of diverse skills and knowledge.
Brilliant. Okay, one more at the back. The lady with the back top. Okay, the one with the red stripe on the black top.
Everyone wins.
Aha. Do you know what? That's very true. Absolutely. Okay, real inclusion means that you can have greater diversity in your workforce, which then reduces poor decision making. It allows you to better understand your customers' needs. And greater diversity in a fast-changing world means that you can reflect the diversity of the changes around you. So having a diverse workforce means that you have a variety of innovative solutions that will help you cope with external changes. And as you said earlier, it allows organisations to connect more with society. That's why we need to have a diverse workforce, to make sure inclusion is real but not superficial. And that applies to all groups of people, not just when thinking about disabled people. Okay, so another question for you. Where does systemic change start?
With people.
From where, though? Which people? Okay, can you say that again? Sorry.
With you.
Are you talking about yourself, as in with you personally? Was that what you said?
It starts from every individual.
Yep, that's certainly one part of it.
Within people's attitudes.
Do you want to finish that sentence?
It's not just individual, but there's another aspect of it which is larger than the individual. Yes, certainly attitude is part of it.
Leadership.
Ooh, that's good. Ooh, that's good. I'm going to say that soon as well. Okay, one more answer. Anyone?
Your processes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Certainly processes are part of it. And actually the answer is the organisation. In the sports sector, we focus quite a lot on frontline services, which is a fantastic thing in itself, and it's really important that we engage with the local communities. We focus on coaches becoming better equipped to work with disabled people and look at how to adapt materials to meet the needs of disabled community. But we haven't focused as much on ourselves, on the sports organisations who are involved in the community. So I'm talking about the non-grassroots organisations. We haven't focused on our own internal culture much when we're working with disabled people. So we all have fantastic resources everywhere. We have the Equality Act to help guide us. We have social media. We have fantastic charity websites, advice, all sorts of information about how to move on. But the information alone is not enough to make the change. Real change comes from, as you said, real pragmatic leadership, both from the organisation and from the individuals in that organisation. Okay, so moving away from inclusion and diversity, now focusing on talent management. I won't ask you any questions about this. This is a question for me. So I think the first step in recruiting, well, starting the cultural change is to recruit disabled people. Now, of course, you have BME groups and you have LGBT groups and so on, but today I am just talking about disabled groups. In America, there was some research, a 5-year study, which found that 40% of discrimination was linked to organisations routinely discriminating against disabled people. For example, through advertising, interviews, selection criteria, performance reviews, pay rises and so on, promotion opportunities. And the research also found that most of the discrimination was actually unnoticed, was just par for the course. People didn't even realise that what they were doing was discriminatory. So when thinking about attracting disabled people are more attracted where there are already managers who are disabled in the organisation. So when you interview people, it's so important that you don't rush to make decisions following the process, because of course that's going to be the time at which you're influenced by your unconscious bias. You need to allow yourself the time to think and reflect on your feelings towards the different candidates. Now, of course, we all like to be with people we like, and to be with people with whom we share similar backgrounds, university education, and so on. And so when you're interviewing people who are different to your group, such as disabled people, it can feel uncomfortable simply because you're not used to those people. And so a safer choice will often feel like choosing someone who is more familiar to us, even though that person is not necessarily as talented as the disabled person. Now, staff are the biggest investment that an organisation makes, not because of the salary, but because of the overhead costs, the pension costs, and other costs linked to employing staff. So bringing in the wrong candidate is an expensive mistake to make. And making sure that you give yourself sufficient time to reflect and choose the person who has the right skills and not the person who matches the demographic is really important. Now, there are some ideas, just to give you some thoughts about recruiting disabled people. So, for example, and these are up here on the PowerPoint, just let me give you one example. If you're thinking about interview methods, you could give candidates lists of questions that you plan to ask them during the interview, just before the interview, say 15 minutes before, so that everyone, including disabled people, is able to look at the questions, get the thoughts together and prepare their answers. It levels the playing field. It gives people a better opportunity to get through the interview process. Or you could have blind interview methods where essentially you turn around and face the other way, and so you don't know if it's a disabled or non-disabled person. They have to sell themselves without being seen by the interviewer, making a judgment about their appearance. So there are examples and suggestions to move forward with that. So a few more ideas here. Get your staff to become more aware of their own unconscious bias. It may be 50 to 100% of your workforce are all biased to non-disabled people. Well, that would mean there's something for you and your workforce to think about where the effort needs to be put to become more open to other groups of people. Terminology and job descriptions can be a barrier, a really powerful barrier as well. Just for example, imagine the word having gravitas. Serious masculine term, which could put women off from applying, for example. Or if you put in words like excellent oral communication skills, high levels of spoken English, well, you've just excluded deaf people and people like Stephen Hawking. He has a different way of communicating, and yet I think you'd all agree he's quite brilliant. And obviously for myself as a BSL user. So you try and fit the organisation, the person into the organisational culture. But if the culture embraces diversity, it doesn't matter. It can be challenging, but it makes life in the workplace more interesting. So just because disabled people are disabled, it doesn't mean that you give them a disabled-focused job. Not all disabled people are experts and focused on disability issues. They might be experts in marketing, communications, finance, strategic transformation, and so on. So try to avoid pigeonholing disabled people as being specialists. But then most importantly, in terms of influence the culture of change, is to recruit and promote disabled people in your organisations without embracing tokenism. Another marvellous drawing of mine. But first of all, there's a person who wants to ask me a question.
Sorry, we would not exclude a disabled person from applying, but we've never had a disabled person apply. How can we include disabled people from applying? Being a sports charity, I think people stand off straight away.
Well, it may be the impression they get from the website, from contact with staff. It may be that the job itself isn't advertised in the channels that will reach disabled people and disabled audiences. It may be that you need to think about your marketing methods and looking at directly targeting different groups of people, as well as, for example, local disability charities who may have a lot of contact with local disabled people. You may want to consider working with employability, who will have a lot of disabled people on their books and their pool. A variety of things.
Okay.
Is that okay? I think we can cover more of that answer perhaps later at the end, if that's useful.
Yes, thank you.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The title of the workshop is Improving Inclusivity for Grassroots Physical Activity in Sport.
Absolutely, yes.
Our experience,
Yep, and just to say, I will come to that point slightly later in the presentation, but go ahead.
okay, so it's coming, you're coming to
Yes,
that.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I have a question related to that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. If you want to hold that to the end, that would be great. Thank you. So now we're focusing on the drawing. We have an elephant and a mouse, and you may be thinking, so what? Let me explain the theory. This is the mouse and elephant theory. It's all about perspective. If you can imagine, the elephant is the manager of the sports organisation or the chief executive. They think they know what's going on and that everything is going well. Staff are happy. Processes and systems and policies seem to be working well. But they can't see the mouse that's running beneath their feet. They use their size to move around. In fact, they could tread on the mouse. The mouse, however, represents the minority group, and in this context, a small disability group. So they can see the barriers, the challenges, they can see the elephant's tail moving, they can see when the large foot's coming towards them. Life is more difficult for them. What I'm trying to say is that when you appoint managers or recruit managers, it's so important because they will affect the culture of the organisation. They influence how staff will work, how they're motivated, and so on. And they can be one of the resistance points in a cultural transformation. So you need to make sure that managers and their unconscious bias is identified and inclusivity is promoted within the organisation and for them. If you say, wow, it doesn't happen in my organisation, I think you've already ignored the impact of unconscious bias in your organisation. Because you will always find ways to break down barriers, and there always will be barriers in your organisation when you're thinking about the workforce and your customers. So we're going to leave that section behind now and now look at the role of the overall organisation. So you can see in this drawing, I'm showing a number of single arrows. You can snap one, but you can't snap 10 together. So if you have a disability team in the organisation, they can't do all of the work necessary around disability themselves. To make an impact, you need to embed it in the organisation across all staff. In London Sport, we have a disability team, and their strategy is woven across all departments. It means that every staff member has a specific responsibility to do disability work. And so here are some examples for your organisations to consider in terms of making a cultural or systemic change in your organisation. Now, I know some of you have already done some of these things, and some of you won't have yet done them, but it's about looking at some of the ideas you may not have considered. So, in terms of the strategic plan, integrating it across the whole organisation is key. Maybe ensuring all staff have a specific task embedded in their everyday work. But the most important thing is linked to what Ian Stevens said earlier about devolution. If local authorities devolve to your organisations, it means you need to make sure that supplier contracts, agreements are linked to the organisation's strategic aims and policies as well, because that will then influence inclusion in those organisations as well. So that is a collaborative approach to spreading inclusion. If all staff in their job descriptions have responsibility for taking action around disability, that's really important. It's not about delegating the responsibility for all the work to a disability team. And if you think in London Sport, we're a team of 3 people. We couldn't possibly manage that for the team. So I'd like us to focus a little bit more on forecasts and not targets when we're thinking about disability work. The reason for this is disability is not a start and end project. It's an ongoing social process where we need to forecast, work out the numbers, work out what we want to achieve, and then move on. If you're monitoring and evaluating internally and sharing information and resources with each other, then we can help each other move forward in learning and break down the invisible barriers within our own organisations. Build up our own resource banks, and also provide them for use for external organisations such as grassroots sports organisations. Because not all grassroots sports organisations will have full-time paid staff, for example. And so our job will be to share resources in a way that helps them to move forward too. So when you're creating projects or work, you always need to discuss all projects with disabled people because they're the experts in their own needs. If you're creating ideas around their needs, you need to make sure they are involved so that your work is effective. And working in relationship with charities, Quite often charities will have lots of resources, ideas and support and members that you can contact who can share with you their ideas to help you move on. So, by synergise, I mean bringing everything together into one organisation, not treating disability as a separate thing, a separate issue. So maybe you're thinking, well, okay, so what? Synergise? How does that work? I would like to show you a video, and this is some disabled people themselves explaining the reasons why this matters.
Makes the organisation more efficient and streamlined.
Greater sharing of resources.
Increases level of expertise and knowledge across board.
Encourages suppliers and contractors to change for wider benefit.
More confident workforce.
A more inclusive, open and creative culture.
Avoids decorating the tree concept, and disability sport should have the same level of importance as other departments' work.
Decorating the tree concept, that basically means making the tree look pretty. It's superficial inclusion. She's just saying that's what you want to avoid. Okay, so UCLA, the basketball coach, John Wooden, and it's a famous quote of his, if you're not making mistakes, then you're not doing anything. We need to create frameworks, set the tone of the culture, allow staff to take risks, explore, try different things, and encourage everyone to move forward. If one department is moving ahead quickly, brilliant, then that means they can share their ideas and resources with other departments. Now, the process allows organisations to have the kind of pull, not push, because push will create resistance and staff will feel, well, why should I do that? What's the point? If we give them opportunities to try out and make mistakes, that's all for the good. Don't worry about doing everything perfectly. Disability work is a long-term journey. It's not a straightforward process. So really, the bottom line is, encourage a culture of learning. Now, there are many great examples of work that's been done that you can look at. So LOCOG, for example, the London Organising Committee of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. They have tried a number of different methods and strategies in terms of engaging and including disabled people, and they made plenty of mistakes. Some things they failed at, ultimately they achieved. So there's a lot of really good examples there that you can read. A report I wrote is in there focused on deaf and deafblind people as well. So worth looking at all their resources. The most important thing for an organisation that you have to have, and I have met so many organisations, and they've all said, oh, we don't have a budget to cover access needs. We want to work with disabled people though. Well, you've already started by shooting yourself in the foot. Every budget needs to have an accessibility budget built in, a line for accessibility in there, before you start going ahead with the broader project. If you don't do that, then changing the culture and the resources will be more difficult. You need to make sure the funding is there to provide the access. And as I said earlier, consult with the end user because they'll tell you what changes you need to make for particular projects. Inclusion is a two-way street. So, systemic change. This goes back to the question I think you were perhaps going to ask about grassroots sports. It's really important for us, for our organisations to change first, to become more inclusive, more conscious, more aware, which means then we can start sharing ideas and resources with the grassroots sports organisations and influence outward, and that's how we will achieve systemic change. The grassroots organisations themselves can't do this work because of time, financial constraints, volunteers, limits to resources, and so on. Sports organisations, we have that. We have the power, the money, and the time to move forward. So it's our responsibility to make the change in ourselves first. Now, a little bit of something random. In Amsterdam, in Schiphol Airport, I'm sure the men here in the audience will know, in the men's toilet, in the urinal, there is a fly on the back of the urinal. And the aim for that is so that men don't make a mess. And that means for the cleaners at the airport, they spend less time in the toilets, because if there's a fly, which is a psychological nudge to change their behaviour and how they work. The reason I'm talking about flies in urinals is that in sports organisations we have ways of working, and sometimes there are nudges that will benefit in much wider ways. Sometimes it just takes a nudge. So it's just thinking about the fly in the urinal for our own organisations. So if we are all doing these things, it means we're creating a collective output. Everyone's working together, and that will influence systemic change. We know that the leadership is a group process. It's not an individual effort. Leaders don't achieve things on their own. If we all work with each other collaboratively and put pressure on each other, benchmark against each other, we help to drive things forward and to make change. If everyone is accountable then for that change. The English Federation of Disability Sport, I'm not going to go on at length because I know that they have a presentation this afternoon that you can go to. So I just want to point out that they have fantastic resources, excellent research, and lots of information that's useful for grassroots sports organisations to look at on a range of topics in learning how to make grassroots organisations more inclusive, and that's a workshop you can go to this afternoon with them as well. So, if the world is becoming more diverse, and if you do not manage that world, it will manage you. If we don't increase diversity across the board, then we will end up being managed by everyone else. If we stay ahead of the game, if we make the adaptations first, stay in control, then we can stay on the right side of the Equality Act and government pressure. You've already seen recently, the Equality Human Rights Commission has done some research, and they produced a report on the Premier League football clubs in terms of accessibility of the stadiums. And the Premier League football clubs, none of them are accessible. They all need to make their services accessible by September. If they don't, the EHRC have said they may well take action of some form which could either be legal or some other kind of action. That's the last thing we want as a sector. We don't want that kind of pressure. We want to be ahead of the game. So MCC is an example of that, the Marylebone Cricket Club. They have a fantastic program where they've delivered disability awareness training to over 200 of their staff so far. They've involved architects in that planning to make sure the architects themselves are including disability principles when they're planning. So other organisations can do the same thing. It's because society and organisations, we aren't separate from each other. Organisations are created by people, not by nature, as I said earlier. Okay, so in summary, if you change the culture, that's the first step that you have to do to making systemic change. It's really important to make sure that you synergize disability work within the organisation and resources influence and culture change and upskill for a more inclusive grassroots sector. So create those resources for the organisations, and that will then help them change the way that they do things and include disabled people as well. Now you all might be thinking, oh my God, it's just so much more information to think about. Where do I start? Well, I've given some practical suggestions and step forwards for making change in terms of making your staff and your organisation less influenced by unconscious bias. So first of all, create disability-specific action plans for each department. Don't delegate the disability work to the disability team. Make sure that everyone owns the problem and measures progress. And then lastly, create accessibility budgets in all of your projects to make sure that they can be delivered accessibly. Okay, it doesn't just happen though. You have to work hard to make this happen. Making changes to include a wider range of diversity is difficult, but you can make it happen. And if you do, then you open up a wealth of opportunities, ideas and resources, and that will influence the wider sports sector. And so I repeat again, it doesn't just happen. It's you in this room who make it happen. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to the workshop. I hope there's some food there for you to take with you and think about and discuss later. If you want to talk about anything to do with inclusion or disability, feel free to approach me. I'm going to be around all day. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
I'm really interested in the recruitment discussion. What are your views on quotas, on governing body boards or organisation boards? And clearly there are pros and cons to both. It doesn't just happen. I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Okay. Firstly, as I said earlier, in terms of unconscious bias, if everyone is aware of their own unconscious bias, it means you'll create a more meritocratic system which disabled people would then have the opportunity to progress through effectively. So that's one form of ensuring that kind of inclusion. If there's no progress made, if there's no opportunities to progress, then I think you could consider using quotas. That is effective, but it shouldn't be used over the longer term. You should perhaps set yourself a limit over, say, 10 years to push the cultural changes and then remove the quota and let the system itself be meritocratic and reflect the culture of the organisation. So as you said, there are positives and negatives to that approach. Thank you.
Yeah. I work for a local authority and we organise physical activity classes for inactive people. And what we find in practice is that people, for example, that are disabled or have medical conditions actually prefer to have classes for people of similar situation. In other words, they don't want to be physically activity on an inclusive basis. So is that not your experience when it comes to physical activity? And if so, how can we persuade disabled or other people with medical conditions, for example, to become more inclusive themselves?
Okay. Well, I think the first thing and the most important thing is that you're giving disabled people the choice. So, for example, in the deaf community, there's often a preference for deaf people to play football with each other. There is a Great Britain Deaf Football League. However, some people are really keen and also want to play in the mainstream community. Some deaf footballers may feel that they want to challenge themselves or challenge the culture of football and learn new skills, and so they will want to integrate into mainstream football environments. But the important thing is to make sure that the coaches then in those new environments are disability aware, they're more inclusive, and they're able to make this happen when they want to. So I think it is up to disabled people, and if your aim is to push inclusivity, push integration, then you may well risk putting people off. Maybe it's a step-by-step process, so looking at it starting from a disability process and then opening some activities up to mixes to allow disabled and non-disabled people to participate together, ultimately to a kind of integration which is open to all. But it's going to depend on the individual and on the context, if they're confident and feel able. So for example, for myself, I row 6-7 times a week. I go to my rowing club and I'm absolutely thirsty for the challenge. I put pressure on my coach and everyone else who are hearing. I don't care. They can just learn to deal with me. For some deaf people, they would never dream of doing that. It's horses for courses, and it's about matching the opportunity with the individual. It's about meeting your customers' diverse needs.
Okay, thank you.
Joseph, sorry, Barry Horn from EFDS. I'll have a chance in this afternoon's plenary session to address that very central point, because our research is quite clear that there are different motivations for disabled people, and the majority would actually prefer to be active in an inclusive setting. It is important that you respond to that third of the disabled population who want dedicated offers, but I want to touch on that a bit more this afternoon. And I think it is quite important that we focus on choice, rightly, as Joseph has. But one of the challenges is that if we continue to do what we've always done, that reach into the inactive disabled population won't take place. So the dedicated offer needs to still be there, but we need to think a lot more about the inclusive offer as well.
Yes, exactly. And it applies when you're thinking about gender and women as well. Many women prefer to have women-only sessions. Equally true for religious groups and for those who want to have perhaps women sessions away from men for those reasons. So it's the same issue. It's about meeting individual needs. And it goes back to choice in the end. Absolutely.
We organise running events for children in parks as well as in schools. Now in the special needs schools we don't have any problems because teachers know what to do, they work with them and we provide them with a program that is all and also normal schools, every child just gets taken in, special needs or not. But when we do the same in the parks, we don't get the parents with the children with special needs. And when we try to organise it, they say, oh, but it's much more difficult for us. How can we educate parents that is still so very important? Because then we are so depending on the parents that see everything as a barrier and therefore don't even want to try to get out there.
It's the same for carers as well. Sense, for example, the deafblind charity, the carers say, well, I'm not interested in sport. I don't want to do sport. But that means then you have to educate and encourage the carers and give them the opportunity to be involved in the activity. And that's really challenging. That's a massive behavioural change approach. Going back to what Sports England said, in terms of targeting people to change their behaviour, to try and ensure that you can persuade them and draw them on to then continue with activity. That's the same for disabled people and the carers. You need to adapt the sessions to involve carers, for example, or parents with their disabled children. Sometimes it might be, for example, in a swimming pool, having separate pool where you have one pool for disabled children or disabled adults who can swim with the teachers, and then another pool where you have the parents or carers swimming. Yes, many answers. There's no one perfect approach. There's no one size-fits-all answer to it. It always has to be specific and linked to the people and their needs. So in some ways, I can't answer for all disabled people and carers because it is so complicated. It's just about making sure that you keep your options open. Okay, I think we need to wrap up now because it should be time for lunch. Everyone's looking hungry to me. I can smell the food wafting through the door. So look, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for listening and have a good day.